The Alpha King needed a mate to his brother's mating ceremony. Who he brought shocked everyone. The wind cut through Astrid's threadbare coat like a blade made of ice. She pressed herself against the stone wall of the storage building, trying to shield the precious bundle of firewood she'd gathered from the forest edge. Her fingers had gone numb an hour ago, but she couldn't afford to drop even a single piece. The wood meant warmth. Warmth meant survival. 3 more days until the ceremony. 3 more days of being invisible. She shifted the bundle higher against her chest and started the long walk back to the Omega quarters, keeping her head down as she passed through the main courtyard of the Frostborn Pack's compound. Snow fell in thick, lazy flakes that would have been beautiful if they weren't so deadly. The temperature had dropped below freezing 2 weeks ago and showed no signs of rising. This far north, winter lasted 8 months out of 12, and only the strong survived. Astrid had survived 24 years. Sometimes she wasn't sure how. "Watch where you're going." She jerked to a stop, nearly dropping her firewood. A woman stood in her path, arms crossed over an expensive fur-lined cloak. Sina, the pack's most prominent unmated Omega, with hair like spun gold and ice-blue eyes that held nothing but contempt. "Sorry." Astrid stepped to the side, keeping her gaze lowered. "You're always sorry." Sina's voice dripped with disdain. "Pathetic. I don't know why the Alpha King even allows you to stay here. You contribute nothing." The words stung because they echoed the thoughts Astrid had about herself on her darkest days. She contributed nothing because she was allowed to contribute nothing. The pack hierarchy had made that clear from the moment she'd arrived 6 years ago, half dead from cold and starvation, begging for sanctuary. They'd given it. Barely. "I should go." Astrid tried to move past, but Sina shifted to block her path again. "The ceremony is in 3 days," Sina said, examining her perfectly manicured nails. "Prince Bjorn's mating to the Silvercrest Alpha's daughter. The most important event in a decade. I assume you'll have the sense to stay in the Omega quarters where you belong." "Of course." "Good. The Alpha King will be looking for a companion to accompany him, and I intend to make sure he chooses someone appropriate." Sina's smile was sharp as broken glass. Someone who actually brings honor to the pack, not shame. Astrid's wolf stirred weakly in the back of her mind. Once, years ago, her wolf had been strong. Now it was as battered and exhausted as the rest of her. She waited until Sina finally swept away in a swirl of expensive fabric and perfume before continuing toward the Omega quarters. The building sat at the far edge of the compound, a squat stone structure that leaked heat through every crack and crevice. 15 Omegas lived there, all unmated, all low status. Most were elderly or disabled. A few, like Astrid, simply had nowhere else to go. The inside wasn't much warmer than the outside. Astrid added her firewood to the communal pile and rubbed her hands together, trying to force feeling back into her fingers. The main room held a single fireplace that they kept burning day and night, rationing wood carefully to make their meager supply last. "You're back." Ira, the eldest Omega at 63, looked up from the pot she was stirring over the fire. Her hands were gnarled with arthritis, but she refused to stop helping with the cooking. "Good timing. Soup's almost ready." "What's in it today?" Astrid crossed to the fire, letting the heat wash over her face. "Turnips, barley, and a bit of rabbit that Keld managed to trap." Ira's smile was tired but genuine. "We'll eat well tonight." Well was relative. The soup would be thin and barely filling, stretched to feed 15 people. But it was warm, and it was food, and that was more than Astrid had on many nights. She helped Ira serve the meal, carrying bowls to the Omegas, who were too frail to stand in line. Magnus, who'd lost his leg in a hunting accident 5 years ago, accepted his bowl with a grateful nod. Thyra, whose mind had started to fade after her mate's death, smiled vacantly and patted Astrid's hand. These were her people. The forgotten, the damaged, the ones the pack kept alive out of duty rather than desire. I heard the Alpha King is looking for someone to accompany him to the ceremony, Era said quietly as they ate. Cena's been preening like a peacock all week. She'll get what she wants. She always does. Astrid blew on her soup to cool it. Maybe. Maybe not. Era's dark eyes were shrewd, despite her age. The Alpha King isn't a fool. He sees more than people think. Astrid had seen the Alpha King exactly 3 times in 6 years, twice from a distance during pack gatherings, and once up close when he'd toured the Omega quarters last winter. He'd been a towering figure with pale blonde hair and eyes the color of winter ice, his presence so commanding that Astrid had felt her wolf's instinctive urge to submit. He'd asked questions about their living conditions, his deep voice carefully neutral, but nothing had changed afterward. The forgotten remained forgotten. She finished her soup and volunteered for evening cleanup duty. Anything to stay busy. Staying busy meant less time to think about the life she'd lost, the family she'd never see again, the future that had died 6 years ago in blood and snow. By the time she finished, full dark had fallen. The temperature dropped further, and Astrid burrowed into her sleeping pallet near the fire, pulling her thin blanket up to her chin. Around her, the other Omegas settled in for the night. Someone coughed wetly in the darkness. Someone else whimpered from a nightmare. Astrid closed her eyes and tried to sleep. The next morning brought fresh snow and a summons that changed everything. The Alpha King wants to see you. Keld, a young Omega who served as their liaison to the main pack, stood in the doorway of the Omega quarters, his expression confused. Just you, Astrid. The room fell silent. 15 pairs of eyes turned to stare. Me? Astrid's heart began to pound. Are you sure? He specifically asked for Astrid from the Omega quarters. That's you, isn't it? Keld shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. You're supposed to come now, to his private study. Era touched Astrid's arm, her grip surprisingly strong. Whatever happens, keep your head. You're stronger than you think. Astrid wasn't sure she believed that, but she nodded anyway. She brushed the worst of the wrinkles from her worn dress and followed Keld out into the bitter morning cold. The main pack building rose 4 stories high, built from massive logs and stone that had withstood centuries of harsh weather. Astrid had never been inside. Omegas from her quarters weren't permitted in the primary structures unless specifically summoned for work duty. Keld led her through a side entrance and up a narrow staircase. The interior was warm, heated by multiple fireplaces and insulated with thick walls. Tapestries hung from the walls depicting wolves running through snowy forests. The scent of pine and wood smoke filled the air. They stopped before a heavy wooden door. Keld knocked twice. Enter. The voice from inside was deep and commanding. Keld opened the door and gestured for Astrid to go in, then disappeared back down the hallway before she could ask him to stay. The study was smaller than she'd expected but richly appointed. Bookshelves lined 2 walls, filled with leather-bound volumes. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace. Behind a massive oak desk sat the Alpha King himself, reviewing what appeared to be a ledger. He looked up as she entered, and Astrid felt the full weight of his attention like a physical force. This close, she could see details she'd missed from a distance. His hair was almost white blonde, pulled back from a face that was all sharp angles and hard planes. His eyes were pale gray, the color of storm clouds over snow. A scar cut through his left eyebrow, giving him a permanently stern expression. Astrid. He set down his pen. Thank you for coming. She wasn't sure what the appropriate response was, so she simply nodded and kept her eyes lowered. Sit, please. There was a chair across from his desk. Astrid perched on the edge of it, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her dress was shabby compared to the richness of the room, and she was acutely aware of every patch and darn in the fabric. The Alpha King studied her for a long moment. My name is Eric, he said finally. I realize we haven't been formally introduced, despite you living in my pack for 6 years. 6 years, 2 months, and 11 days. But who was counting? I'll be direct, Eric continued. My brother's mating ceremony is in 3 days. As Alpha King, I'm expected to attend with a companion. I'm choosing you. Astrid's head snapped up before she could stop herself. What? I need someone to accompany me to the ceremony. I'm asking you to fulfill that role. His expression remained neutral, giving nothing away. But I'm no one. I'm from the Omega quarters. Cena would be a much better choice, or any of the unmated wolves from the main pack. The words tumbled out in a rush. I'm not asking Cena, I'm asking you. Why? The question escaped before Astrid could censor herself. Heat flooded her cheeks. I'm sorry. That was inappropriate. It's a fair question. Eric leaned back in his chair, his gaze never leaving her face. The truth is, I need someone who won't spend the entire ceremony trying to secure a mating bond with me. Someone who won't use the event to advance their own political agenda. Someone who can be trusted to be exactly who they are, nothing more and nothing less. You don't know who I am. Don't I? Something flickered in his eyes. You've been living in my pack for 6 years. You think I don't pay attention to my people? Astrid had no answer for that. She'd spent 6 years being invisible. The idea that the Alpha King had noticed her existence at all was incomprehensible. This would be a business arrangement, Eric said. You would accompany me to the ceremony, stand by my side during the formal events, participate in the celebrations. In exchange, I'll ensure you're compensated appropriately. Compensated how? What do you need? The question was so unexpected that Astrid found herself answering honestly. Firewood. The Omega quarters are freezing. We're rationing what we have, but it won't last through the winter. And food. Real food, not just turnips and barley. Some of the elders are getting sick from malnutrition. Eric's expression darkened. The Omega quarters don't have adequate firewood. We make do with what we're allocated. What you're allocated should be sufficient for the winter. Astrid bit her lip. She was already saying too much, but the words kept coming. The allocation gets reduced every year. We've learned to manage. Manage by freezing? His voice had gone cold in a way that made her wolf whimper. How long has this been happening? I don't know. Since before I arrived. Eric was silent for a long moment, his jaw tight. Then he pulled out a piece of parchment and began writing. This is an order to the quartermaster. The Omega quarters will receive triple their current allocation of firewood, effective immediately. Also fresh meat, vegetables, and grain. If there are any medical needs, those will be addressed as well. He signed the document with a flourish and held it out to her. Astrid took it with shaking hands, hardly daring to believe what she was seeing. This is too much. It's the bare minimum required to keep people alive. Eric's tone was sharp. I'll be conducting a full review of resource allocation across all pack facilities. This should never have happened. Astrid stared at the parchment, her throat tight. 3 months of firewood, real food, medicine for Thyra's cough and Magnus's pain. So, Eric said, his voice gentling slightly, will you accompany me to the ceremony? She looked up at him, this powerful Alpha King who had just given her more with a single signature than she'd received in 6 years. Yes. Good. He stood, and Astrid quickly rose as well. You'll need appropriate clothing. I'll have the pack's seamstress visit the Omega quarters this afternoon to take your measurements. The ceremony is formal, so you'll need several outfits. I can't afford... You're representing the Alpha King. The pack will cover all expenses. He moved around the desk, and Astrid had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. He was easily a foot taller than her, his presence overwhelming in the small space. Is there anything else you need? 1,000 things. A life that wasn't defined by survival. A future that held more than cold and hunger. A pack that saw her as more than a burden. No, she said quietly. Thank you. Eric nodded. Take that order to the quartermaster immediately. Tell him it comes directly from me, and I expect it fulfilled by tonight. He opened the door for her, and Astrid slipped past him into the hallway. She made it halfway down the stairs before her legs started shaking so badly she had to stop and lean against the wall. The Alpha King had chosen her, out of all the wolves in the pack. She didn't understand it, couldn't begin to guess his real motivations, but the parchment in her hands was real. The firewood would be real. The food would be real. For the first time in 6 years, something had changed. The quartermaster, a grizzled older wolf named Torsten, looked at the Alpha King's order with barely concealed shock. Triple allocation? That's what it says. Astrid kept her voice steady despite her nerves. Torsten read the order again, then looked at her with new assessment in his eyes. I'll have the first delivery made this afternoon. The rest by tomorrow evening. Thank you. She hurried back to the Omega quarters, clutching the parchment like a lifeline. When she burst through the door, everyone looked up in alarm. What happened? Era demanded. Are you all right? The Alpha King wants me to accompany him to the ceremony. The words came out in a rush. And he's tripling our firewood allocation and sending real food and medicine if we need it. Silence, then chaos. Triple allocation? Magnus struggled to his feet, leaning heavily on his crutch. That can't be right. It's right. Astrid held up the parchment. He signed it himself. Why would the Alpha King choose you for the ceremony? Sina's voice came from the doorway. She must have followed Astrid from the main building. You're nobody. I don't know why he chose me. Astrid met Sina's furious gaze, but he did. This is ridiculous. You can't possibly represent the pack appropriately. You don't know how to behave in formal settings. You'll embarrass him. Sina's beautiful face was twisted with rage. I'm going to speak to him directly. This is clearly a mistake. Go ahead, Era said mildly. I'm sure the Alpha King will appreciate you questioning his judgment. Sina's eyes narrowed, but she spun on her heel and stalked away. The seamstress arrived that afternoon, as promised. Freya was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and clever hands, and she tutted over Astrid's measurements like a mother hen. You're too thin, she announced, wrapping a measuring tape around Astrid's waist. We'll need to account for some weight gain once you start eating properly. Don't want the dresses falling off you in a week. I don't need multiple dresses. The Alpha King specified 3 formal gowns and appropriate undergarments. Freya moved to measure Astrid's shoulders. Who am I to argue with the Alpha King? The other Omegas watched the proceedings with fascination. This was more excitement than they'd seen in years. What color do you like? Freya asked, jotting down numbers in a small notebook. Astrid blinked. No one had asked her what she liked in longer than she could remember. I don't know. With your coloring, I'm thinking ice blue for the ceremony itself. The first delivery of firewood arrived before sunset, brought by 3 young wolves from the main pack, who looked distinctly uncomfortable as they stacked the logs against the exterior wall of the Omega quarters. Astrid watched through the window as the pile grew higher and higher, more wood than they'd had in the last 3 months combined. This is really happening, Era murmured beside her. I thought maybe I'd dreamed it. We all did. Astrid pressed her palm against the cold glass. The temperature had dropped again as the sun set, and her breath fogged the window. I keep waiting for someone to come take it all back. But no one came. Instead, an hour later, another delivery arrived. This time, it was food. Sacks of grain and root vegetables, yes, but also fresh meat wrapped in cloth, dried fish, preserved berries, and even a small wheel of cheese. The young wolves who carried it inside looked at the sparse interior of the Omega quarters with expressions that ranged from pity to shame. "Where do you want this?" one of them asked, hefting a sack of barley. "The storage room." Magnus hobbled forward to show them. "Through there." They worked in silence, making multiple trips from the cart outside. When they finished, the Omega Quarter's storage room was fuller than Astrid had ever seen it. Thyra started crying, her frail shoulders shaking with sobs. "Hush now." Ira wrapped an arm around her. "It's all right. We're going to be all right." Astrid wasn't sure she believed that. 6 years of barely surviving had taught her that good fortune was temporary and trust was dangerous. But as she watched Keld start a proper fire in the hearth, feeding it with wood they didn't have to ration, she felt something unfamiliar stir in her chest. Hope. Small and fragile, but undeniably there. That night, the Omega Quarters were truly warm for the first time since Astrid had arrived. They ate stew thick with meat and vegetables, and there was enough for everyone to have seconds. Magnus's perpetual grimace of pain eased slightly. Thyra stopped coughing. Even the youngest Omega, a 19-year-old named Liv, who'd been born with a twisted foot, smiled as she soaked up the heat from the fire. "Tell us about the Alpha King," Liv said, looking at Astrid with curious eyes. "What was he like?" "Intimidating." Astrid wrapped her hands around her bowl, savoring the warmth. "He's even bigger up close than he looks from a distance. And his voice." She trailed off, remembering the way his deep voice had seemed to resonate in her bones. "But was he kind?" Era asked. "Or cold?" "I don't know." Astrid considered the question carefully. "He was direct. When I told him about the firewood shortage, he got angry. Not at me, I think, but at the situation. He wrote the order immediately." "The Alpha King has always been fair," Magnus said from his spot by the fire. "Distant, maybe, but fair. When I lost my leg, he made sure I had a place here instead of being cast out. Some packs would have left me to die." "Some packs would have left all of us to die," Ira added quietly. "We're alive because he allows it. That counts for something." Astrid supposed it did, but there was a difference between being allowed to live and actually living. She'd spent 6 years in a gray space between the two, and she wasn't sure which side she fell on anymore. "Why do you think he chose you?" Liv asked. "For the ceremony, I mean. No offense, but you're not exactly important, connected, beautiful." Astrid supplied the words Liv was too kind to say. "I don't know. He said he needed someone who wouldn't try to secure a mating bond with him, someone without a political agenda." "Smart," Magnus grunted. "Half the unmated females in the main pack have been circling him like vultures for years. Sina's the worst of them." As if summoned by her name, Sina appeared in the doorway the next morning, just as Astrid was helping Era prepare breakfast. The blonde Omega swept into the room like she owned it, her expensive cloak swirling around her ankles. "I spoke to the Alpha King last night," she announced without preamble, "about his choice of companion." Astrid's stomach clenched, but she kept her expression neutral. And he told me his decision was final." Sina's voice dripped with venom. "But don't think for a moment that this means anything. You're a charity case, nothing more. He's probably taking pity on you." "Probably," Astrid agreed, because it was easier than arguing. "You'll embarrass him. Everyone will wonder why the Alpha King lowered himself to bring someone from the Omega Quarters. You'll be a laughingstock." Sina stepped closer, her ice blue eyes glittering with malice. "And when this is over, when the ceremony is done and you're no longer useful, you'll come right back here to your miserable little existence. Remember that." She left before Astrid could respond, though Astrid wasn't sure what she would have said anyway. Sina was probably right. This was temporary. A strange aberration in the normal order of things. When the ceremony ended, Astrid would return to being invisible, but at least the Omega Quarters would have firewood. Freya returned the following afternoon with the first dress. She'd worked through the night, she explained, to have at least one outfit ready for a fitting. The other two would be completed by the morning of the ceremony. The dress was the color of ice at dawn, a pale blue so light it was almost white. The fabric was soft wool lined with silk, finer than anything Astrid had ever touched. Freya helped her into it, lacing up the back with practiced efficiency. "There," the seamstress said, stepping back to assess her work. "Look." She turned Astrid toward the small, cracked mirror that hung on the wall of the Omega quarters. The woman looking back was a stranger. The dress transformed her from a half-starved waif into something almost elegant. The color brought out the silver blue of her eyes and made her pale blonde hair look intentional rather than washed out. "I don't look like myself," Astrid whispered. "You look like yourself in a proper dress," Freya corrected. "There's a difference. Now let's talk about your hair. We'll need to do something special for the ceremony." Over the next 2 days, Astrid felt increasingly like she was preparing for someone else's life. Freya taught her how to arrange her hair in elaborate braids woven with silver thread. Era, who'd once served in a high-ranking household before her mate's death, coached her on formal etiquette and proper forms of address. Even Magnus contributed, explaining the political dynamics between the various packs that would be represented at the ceremony. "The Silvercrest Alpha is powerful," he said, whittling a piece of wood by the fire. "His daughter's mating to Prince Bjorn creates an alliance that will strengthen both packs. There will be wolves there from a dozen territories, all watching to see how the Frostborn Pack conducts itself." "No pressure," Astrid muttered. "You'll be fine." Era patted her hand. "Just stay close to the Alpha King and follow his lead. He won't let anything happen to you." Astrid wasn't sure why Era thought that. Eric had chosen her for practical reasons, not protective ones. She was a tool to avoid unwanted attention, nothing more. But the night before the ceremony, as Astrid lay on her pallet trying to sleep, she found herself thinking about the way Eric's expression had darkened when she'd mentioned the firewood shortage. The immediate action he'd taken, the order he'd written without hesitation. Maybe there was more to him than political calculation, or maybe she was just desperate to believe in something. The morning of the ceremony dawned clear and bitterly cold. Astrid woke before sunrise, her stomach churning with nerves. The Omega quarters buzzed with activity, as everyone helped prepare her. Freya arrived early with the final 2 dresses and an array of accessories. Era heated water for washing and laid out clean undergarments. Even Thyra, in her confused state, seemed to understand something important was happening and kept patting Astrid's cheek with gentle hands. "You're going to be beautiful," Liv said, watching as Freya arranged Astrid's hair in an intricate pattern of braids that cascaded down her back. "I'm going to be terrified," Astrid corrected. "That too." Freya secured the last braid with a silver pin. "But you'll hide it well. Now let's get you into the dress." The ceremony dress was even more elaborate than the first one Freya had made. The same ice blue color, but with silver embroidery along the hem and sleeves that caught the light like frost. The bodice fit perfectly, emphasizing what little curve Astrid had while still being modest enough for a formal event. Over it went a cloak lined with soft gray fur that must have cost more than Astrid had earned in her entire life. "The Alpha King sent the fur this morning," Freya said, fastening the cloak at Astrid's shoulders with an ornate silver brooch. "He wanted to make sure you'd be warm." Something twisted in Astrid's chest. He'd thought about her comfort. That shouldn't have mattered as much as it did. A knock at the door made everyone freeze. Keld poked his head in, his eyes widening when he saw Astrid. "The Alpha King sent his personal guard to escort you to the main hall," he said. "They're waiting outside." This was it. No more preparation, no more delays. Astrid took a deep breath and let it out slowly. "You can do this," Era said firmly. "Remember who you are. You've survived things that would have broken most wolves. A ceremony is nothing compared to that." Astrid wished she believed that. But she nodded and followed Keld outside. 2 guards waited in the snow, both tall and imposing in formal armor. They fell into step on either side of her without a word, escorting her across the compound toward the main hall. Wolves stopped to stare as they passed. Astrid kept her eyes forward and her chin up, the way Era had taught her. The main hall was a massive structure built from ancient timber and stone, large enough to hold the entire pack for gatherings. Today it had been transformed for the mating ceremony. Evergreen boughs hung from the rafters, filling the air with the scent of pine. Candles flickered in iron sconces along the walls. Long tables had been set up for the feast that would follow the ceremony, already laden with food. And everywhere there were wolves. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all dressed in their finest. The sound of conversation filled the space, a low rumble punctuated by occasional laughter. Astrid's wolf whimpered in the back of her mind, overwhelmed by the press of so many dominant presences. This way. One of the guards guided her toward the front of the hall, where a raised platform had been constructed. Several high-ranking wolves already stood there, including Prince Bjorn himself. The prince was tall and broad-shouldered like his brother, with the same pale blonde hair and sharp features. But where Eric's presence commanded respect through sheer authority, Bjorn had a warmth to him that put people at ease. He smiled when he saw Astrid approaching, though confusion flickered across his face. And then Eric stepped into view, and everything else faded into background noise. He wore formal leathers dyed deep black, with silver clasps at his shoulders, and a heavy fur cloak that made him look even more imposing than usual. His hair had been pulled back in a warrior's braid, and someone had polished his boots until they gleamed. But it was his eyes that caught Astrid's attention. Those pale gray eyes that had haunted her thoughts for the past 3 days. They found her immediately in the crowd, and something flickered in their depths. Surprise, maybe, or appreciation. He descended from the platform and crossed to her in long strides. The crowd parted instinctively before him. Astrid. His deep voice seemed to resonate in her bones, just like she remembered. You look well. Thank you, Alpha King. She dropped into the formal curtsy Era had taught her, grateful when her shaking legs held steady. Eric, he corrected quietly. When we're together, you may call me Eric. That seemed dangerously intimate, but Astrid nodded. Up close, she could smell his scent, pine and winter wind, with something darker underneath. Something that made her wolf stir with interest for the first time in years. Eric offered her his arm. Stay close to me, I'll handle the introductions. Astrid placed her hand on his forearm, feeling the solid muscle beneath the leather. He was warm, radiating heat like a furnace, and she found herself wanting to lean into that warmth. He led her back to the platform, and Astrid felt the weight of dozens of eyes tracking their movement. Whispers followed in their wake. Who is she? I've never seen her before. Why would the Alpha King bring someone so plain? Astrid kept her expression neutral, but each whispered comment landed like a small wound. Eric's jaw tightened, suggesting he heard them too, but he said nothing as he guided her to a position beside him on the platform. Ignore them, he murmured, low enough that only she could hear. Their opinions don't matter. Easy for him to say. He was the Alpha King. No one would dare question his worth. The ceremony began shortly after, as the sun reached its zenith and flooded the hall with pale winter light. A priestess in white robes stepped forward to perform the ritual, her voice carrying through the space as she spoke the ancient words of binding. Prince Bjorn and his mate, a beautiful dark-haired woman named Astrid, stood before her with joined hands. Wait. The bride was also named Astrid. Eric must have felt her tension because he leaned down slightly. Different spelling, he whispered. Hers ends with an E. That was a relief at least. Astrid watched as the priestess wrapped a silver cord around the couple's joined hands, symbolizing the bond being formed. The ceremony was beautiful in its simplicity, focused on the commitment being made rather than unnecessary pageantry. When the priestess declared them mated, the hall erupted in cheers and howls. Bjorn pulled his new mate into a kiss that made several people whistle appreciatively. Eric remained still beside Astrid, his expression unreadable. She wondered what he was thinking. Did he want a mate of his own? Or was he content to remain alone, married to his duty as Alpha King? The feast began immediately after the ceremony concluded. Long tables filled with food, roasted meats, fresh bread, winter vegetables prepared in dozens of ways, and mead that flowed freely. Musicians set up in one corner and began playing, filling the hall with music. Eric guided Astrid to the high table where the most important guests were seated. She found herself between him and an older wolf who introduced himself as Alpha Rune of the Silvercrest Pack, father of the bride. "So you're the mysterious companion," Rune said, his sharp eyes assessing her. "I admit I was curious. The Alpha King doesn't usually bring anyone to these events." "I'm honored he asked me," Astrid said carefully. "Are you mated?" "No, Alpha." Rune took a drink of his mead. "Interesting choice." Before Astrid could figure out how to respond to that, Eric spoke up. "Astrid has been a member of my pack for 6 years. I value her discretion and integrity." It was a diplomatic answer that revealed nothing, but it seemed to satisfy Rune. The older Alpha turned his attention to the wolf on his other side, leading Astrid to breathe a small sigh of relief. "You're doing well," Eric said quietly. "I know this isn't easy. Everyone's staring at me." Astrid kept her voice low. "They're trying to figure out why you brought someone like me. Someone like you?" Eric's tone sharpened. "What does that mean?" "Someone with no status, no family, no connections. Someone who lives in the Omega quarters and survives on charity." But she didn't say that part out loud. Eric was silent for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled. "Your worth isn't determined by your status or connections. Anyone who thinks otherwise isn't worth your concern." Astrid wanted to believe him. But she'd spent 6 years learning exactly how much her lack of status mattered. The world didn't work the way Eric seemed to think it should. The feast continued for hours. Astrid picked at her food, too nervous to eat much despite the incredible array of dishes. Eric remained beside her, a solid presence that somehow made the overwhelming situation slightly more bearable. He fielded questions from various wolves who approached the high table, his responses always measured and diplomatic. As the sun began to set, the tables were cleared to make room for dancing. The music shifted to something faster, more energetic, and wolves began pairing off to move through the traditional steps. "Do you dance?" Eric asked. Astrid's heart jumped. Not really. I mean, I know the basic steps, but I'm not very good." "Neither am I." Something that might have been amusement flickered across his stern features. "But it's expected. Will you trust me not to let you fall?" She looked up at him, at this powerful Alpha King who had given her firewood and food and protection without asking for anything in return. Who had chosen her when he could have had anyone. Who was looking at her now, like she mattered. "Yes," she said. "I trust you." Eric led her onto the floor with a confidence that made the actual dancing seem secondary. His hand settled at her waist, warm even through the layers of fabric, while his other hand engulfed hers completely. The size difference between them should have been intimidating, but instead, Astrid felt strangely protected. "Just follow my lead," he murmured as the music began. "And try not to think about everyone watching." "That's like telling me not to breathe," Astrid said, but she let him guide her into the first steps. He was right about not being a particularly skilled dancer. His movements were competent but stiff, like someone performing a duty rather than enjoying himself. But he was strong and steady, and he didn't let her stumble even when she missed a step. "You're better than you claimed," Eric said, after they'd completed the first pattern without incident. "You're worse than I expected for an Alpha King." The words slipped out before Astrid could stop them, and she froze in horror. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that." But Eric surprised her by laughing. It was a low, rough sound, like he was out of practice, but genuine. "Probably not, but you're not wrong. My father tried to teach me when I was young, but I was always more interested in combat training. It shows, Astrid said, then bit her lip. But Eric was still smiling slightly. So maybe she hadn't completely destroyed her chances of surviving this event. They danced through 2 more songs before Eric guided her back toward the edge of the floor. Astrid's feet ached in the formal shoes Freya had provided, and she was grateful for the reprieve. Eric procured 2 cups of mead and handed her one. "Thank you for doing this," he said. "I know it's been uncomfortable." "It's not so bad." Astrid took a sip of the mead, feeling the warmth spread through her chest. "Better than freezing in the Omega quarters." Eric's expression darkened. "About that. I've been reviewing the resource allocation records for the past year. The Omega quarters should have been receiving regular deliveries of firewood and supplies. Someone's been diverting them." Astrid's stomach clenched. "Do you know who?" "I have suspicions. My steward claims there was a miscommunication about quantities, but the numbers don't add up." His jaw tightened. "I'll get to the bottom of it. No one in my pack should be left to freeze." Before Astrid could respond, a commotion near the entrance drew their attention. Several wolves had gathered there, their voices raised in what sounded like an argument. Eric handed his cup to a nearby servant and moved toward the disturbance with Astrid following close behind. "What's happening here?" Eric's voice cut through the noise like a blade. The crowd parted immediately, revealing Sina at the center of the group. Her face was flushed, whether from mead or anger Astrid couldn't tell, and she was gesturing wildly at a young male wolf who looked deeply uncomfortable. "This Omega," Sina spat the word like a curse, "was trying to steal food from the feast tables. I caught him red-handed, stuffing bread into his pockets like a common thief." The young wolf, who couldn't have been more than 17, kept his eyes on the floor. His clothes were threadbare, and Astrid recognized him from the Omega quarters. His name was Finn, and he'd arrived just a few months ago after his family had died in a hunting accident. "Is this true?" Eric asked, his tone carefully neutral. Finn nodded miserably. "Yes, Alpha King. I'm sorry. I just thought, there's so much food, and my sister, she's only 8, and she's been so hungry." "So you decided to steal?" Sina's voice dripped with contempt. "Typical Omega behavior. This is why they can't be trusted." Something hot and fierce rose in Astrid's chest. She'd spent 6 years staying quiet, staying invisible, letting people like Sina say whatever they wanted without challenge. But watching this terrified boy being humiliated for trying to feed his little sister, she felt something inside her snap. He wasn't stealing. Astrid stepped forward, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I gave him permission to take food for his sister." Every eye turned to her. Eric's gaze was sharp and assessing. Sina's face twisted with fury. "You?" Sina laughed, the sound ugly. "You have no authority to give permission for anything. You're nobody. You're just another Omega who got lucky enough to catch the Alpha King's pity." "I'm the Alpha King's companion for this event," Astrid said, lifting her chin. "And as such, I have every right to ensure a child doesn't go hungry while we feast." "You overreach," Sina hissed, taking a step closer. "You forget your place." "My place is wherever the Alpha King says it is." Astrid held her ground, even though her wolf was screaming at her to submit to the dominant female. "And right now, I'm standing here telling you that this boy did nothing wrong." "Enough." Eric's single word silenced the entire hall. He looked at Finn, his expression unreadable. "You have a sister?" "Yes, Alpha King." Finn's voice shook. "She's back in the Omega quarters. She's been sick, and I thought if I could bring her some meat, maybe some of the honey cakes." "Why didn't you come to me directly?" Eric asked. "If there's a child going hungry in my pack, I should have been informed." "I didn't think you'd care." The words came out in a whisper. "We're just Omegas." The silence that followed was deafening. Astrid watched the emotions flicker across Eric's face too quickly to identify. When he finally spoke, his voice was dangerously quiet. Every member of this pack matters, every single one. If you have been led to believe otherwise, then I have failed in my duty as Alpha King." He turned to one of his guards. "Torsten, my head of household, have someone prepare a basket of food and take it to Finn's sister immediately. Include meat, bread, honey cakes, and whatever else a sick child might need." "Yes, Alpha King." Torsten, a grizzled wolf with gray streaking his dark hair, moved to carry out the order immediately. Eric looked back at Finn. "Tomorrow, you and your sister will meet with Magnus at the Omega quarters. We're going to review every resident's situation and ensure everyone has what they need. Is that understood?" "Yes, Alpha King." Finn looked like he might cry from relief. "Thank you. Go." Eric's tone softened slightly. "Be with your sister." Finn practically ran from the hall. The crowd began to disperse, the entertainment over, but Sina remained rooted in place. Her face had gone pale, then red, then pale again. "You humiliated me," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "In front of everyone." "For her?" She pointed at Astrid with a trembling finger. "You humiliated yourself," Eric corrected coldly, "by trying to punish a child's hunger. Now leave before I decide you need a formal reminder about pack values." For a moment, Astrid thought Sina might actually challenge him, but even through her fury, the blonde Omega wasn't stupid enough to defy a direct order from the Alpha King. She turned and stalked from the hall, her expensive cloak swirling behind her. Eric exhaled slowly, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "We should talk. Somewhere private." Astrid's brief surge of courage evaporated. She'd just contradicted Sina in front of half the pack and claimed an authority she didn't actually have. Eric had supported her in the moment, but now that the crisis had passed, would he be angry about her presumption? He led her through a side door and down a corridor to a small room that appeared to be some kind of office. A desk sat against one wall, covered in papers and maps. A fire burned in the hearth, keeping the space warm. Eric closed the door behind them and leaned against it, studying her with those pale gray eyes. "That was either very brave or very foolish," he said finally. "Probably both." Astrid wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the fire. "I'm sorry if I overstepped. I just couldn't stand there and watch her tear into that boy for trying to feed his sister." "Don't apologize." Eric pushed away from the door and moved closer. "You did the right thing. I should have been aware of the situation with Finn and his sister. The fact that I wasn't is unacceptable." "You can't know everything that happens in your pack," Astrid said. "There are too many wolves, too many problems." "Perhaps. But the Omega quarters seem to have an unusual number of problems that somehow never reach my attention." His expression hardened. "That's going to change. Starting tomorrow, I want a full accounting of every Omega situation. Living conditions, health status, resource allocation, everything." "That's going to upset people," Astrid warned. "The Omegas aren't used to anyone caring about their welfare. And the wolves who've been managing the resources." She trailed off, not wanting to directly accuse anyone. "The wolves who've been managing the resources poorly will find themselves reassigned," Eric finished grimly. "I won't tolerate neglect or abuse in my pack, regardless of who's responsible." Astrid believed him. There was a steel in his voice that said he meant every word, but she also knew how the pack hierarchy worked. Omegas were at the bottom, and most wolves preferred it that way. Changing that dynamic would create resistance. "Why do you care?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. "I don't mean that disrespectfully. I just don't understand why you're willing to fight this battle. Most alphas wouldn't bother." Eric was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. "My mother was an Omega," he said finally. "She died when I was young, but I remember how some of the pack treated her, like she was less than, like her only value was in producing an heir." His jaw clenched. "My father loved her deeply, and he made sure she was respected. But after she died, I watched how quickly the pack's attitude toward Omegas shifted, how easily they were dismissed and forgotten. Astrid's heart clenched. She'd known Eric's mother had died young, but she hadn't known the woman had been an Omega. That explained so much about his reaction to the Omega Quarter's conditions. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "Losing a parent is hard. It was a long time ago." But the pain in his voice suggested it still hurt. "The point is, I know what it's like to watch someone you care about be treated as lesser. I won't perpetuate that in my own pack." They stood in silence for a moment, the only sound the crackling of the fire. Astrid felt something shifting between them, some barrier coming down. This wasn't the distant Alpha King speaking. This was just Eric, a man who'd lost his mother too young and carried that wound with him. "We should return to the feast," Eric said eventually. "People will wonder where we've gone." "Let them wonder." The words came out more boldly than Astrid intended, but she didn't take them back. "I'm tired of worrying about what people think." Something flickered in Eric's eyes. "Are you?" "Maybe just for tonight." Astrid moved closer to the fire, holding her hands out to the warmth. "Tomorrow I'll go back to being invisible. But tonight, I stood up to Sina and didn't die. That feels like something worth celebrating." "You're not invisible." Eric's voice was low and intense. "I see you, Astrid. I have since the moment you walked into my office and told me the truth about the firewood instead of making excuses or trying to manipulate me." Astrid's breath caught. She turned to look at him and found him closer than she'd expected. Close enough that she could see the silver flecks in his gray eyes. Close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. "Eric." She wasn't sure what she was going to say. Wasn't sure what this moment was or what it meant. A sharp knock on the door shattered the tension. Eric stepped back, his expression closing off into the neutral mask he wore in public. "Enter," he called. Torsten opened the door, his weathered face grave. "Alpha King, there's been an incident. You need to come immediately." "What kind of incident?" Eric's tone sharpened. "It's the Omega quarters, sir. Someone set fire to the woodpile." Astrid's blood turned to ice. All that firewood, the first real warmth they'd had in months, and someone had destroyed it. She knew without being told who was responsible. Eric's face transformed into something savage. "Show me." They ran through the compound, Eric's long strides eating up the distance, while Astrid struggled to keep pace in her formal dress. Other wolves joined them as word spread, until a small crowd was streaming toward the Omega quarters. The fire was already out by the time they arrived, but the damage was done. The entire woodpile had been reduced to smoldering ash and charred logs. The acrid smell of smoke hung heavy in the air. Era and the other Omegas stood in a cluster nearby, their faces stricken. "Is anyone hurt?" Eric demanded. "No, Alpha King." Magnus limped forward, his expression furious. "We saw the flames and managed to put it out before it spread to the building, but the wood is gone." "Who did this?" Eric's voice was deadly quiet. "I did." Sina stepped out of the shadows, her chin raised defiantly. "And I'd do it again." These Omegas were getting ideas above their station. Someone needed to remind them of their place. The silence that followed was absolute. Astrid felt her wolf howling in fury, demanding justice. But it was Eric who moved first. He crossed the distance to Sina in 3 strides and grabbed her by the throat, lifting her off her feet. His eyes had gone completely white, his wolf rising to the surface in a display of dominance that made every wolf present drop their gaze in submission. "You deliberately destroyed pack resources," Eric growled, his voice distorted by his wolf's presence. "You endangered pack members out of petty jealousy. You are a disgrace." Sina clawed at his hand, her face turning red, but she couldn't break his grip. "They're just Omegas," she choked out. "They don't matter. They matter to me." Eric's grip tightened fractionally. "And you've just committed a crime that warrants exile." Fear flashed across Sina's face. Exile was a death sentence in winter. No lone wolf could survive the harsh northern territories without pack support. "Please," she gasped. "I'm sorry. I'll do anything." Eric held her for another long moment before dropping her to the snow. She collapsed in a heap, coughing and gasping for air. "You're stripped of your Omega status," Eric said coldly. "You'll be reassigned to the lowest work details. Cleaning, hauling, whatever needs doing. You'll earn your place in this pack through service, and if I hear of you causing any further problems, exile will be the kindest option I offer. Am I understood?" "Yes, Alpha King." Sina's voice was barely a whisper. "Torsten." Eric didn't take his eyes off Sina. "Have her escorted to the work barracks. Make sure everyone knows her new status." 2 guards stepped forward and hauled Sina to her feet. She looked at Astrid as they dragged her away, and the hatred in her eyes was a physical thing. But beneath the hatred was fear, and that fear meant she wouldn't be a threat anymore. Eric turned to face the gathered Omegas, his expression softening slightly. "I apologize. This should never have happened. Tomorrow morning, I want triple the amount of firewood delivered. And from now on, the Omega quarters will receive the same resource allocation as any other residential area in this pack. No exceptions." "Thank you, Alpha King." Magnus's voice was thick with emotion. Eric nodded, then looked at Astrid. "Are you all right?" She realized she was shaking, though whether from cold or reaction she wasn't sure. "I'm fine. Just angry." "Good." Something fierce and approving flashed in his eyes. "You should be angry. What she did was unconscionable." The crowd began to disperse, wolves returning to the feast or their own quarters. Eric stayed, helping the Omegas salvage what little usable wood remained. Astrid worked beside him, her formal dress getting covered in soot and ash. But she didn't care. This mattered more than staying clean. When they'd done all they could, Eric walked Astrid back toward the Omega quarters entrance. The night had grown late, and most of the pack had retired. The sounds of celebration from the main hall had faded to silence. "I should let you rest," Eric said, but he didn't move to leave. "Thank you," Astrid said. "For everything. The firewood, the food, standing up for Finn, and for what you did tonight with Sina." "She committed a crime. I simply enforced pack law." But his tone suggested it had been more personal than that. "Still, thank you." Astrid hesitated, then added, "Your mother would be proud of you. For caring about the Omegas, for trying to make things better." Eric's expression cracked, just for a moment, revealing a depth of pain and longing that made Astrid's chest ache. "I hope so," he said quietly. They stood in the snow, the space between them charged with something Astrid didn't have a name for. She wanted to reach out, to offer comfort, but she didn't know if she had the right. "Tomorrow," Eric said finally, "I'd like you to help with the review of Omega living conditions. You know what they need better than anyone. Will you do that?" "Yes." Astrid didn't hesitate. "Of course." "Good." He smiled slightly, and the expression transformed his stern features into something almost gentle. "Good night, Astrid." "Good night, Eric." She watched him walk away, his broad shoulders disappearing into the darkness. When she finally turned to enter the Omega quarters, she found Era waiting just inside the door. "Well," the older woman said, her eyes twinkling, "that was quite an evening." "That's one way to put it." Astrid slumped against the wall, exhaustion hitting her all at once. "The Alpha King is a good man," Ira said thoughtfully, "and he looks at you like you matter. He looks at everyone like they matter. That's what makes him a good Alpha." "No," Era shook her head. "He looks at you differently, like he sees something the rest of us miss." Astrid didn't know how to respond to that, so she changed the subject. "We need to organize the Omega quarters for tomorrow's review. If Eric's serious about improving conditions, we should have a list of priorities ready." "Always practical." But Era smiled. All right, let's get everyone together and start making that list. We might not get another chance like this. They worked late into the night, documenting every problem, every need, every small improvement that could make life in the Omega Quarters more bearable. And as Astrid wrote, she felt that fragile hope from days ago growing stronger. Maybe things really could change. Maybe she wasn't as invisible as she'd thought. And maybe, just maybe, the way Eric looked at her meant something after all. Part 4. The morning after the fire, Astrid woke to find the Omega Quarters transformed. True to his word, Eric had sent triple the firewood, along with additional blankets, preserved food, and medical supplies. Wolves in the Alpha King's colors moved through the building, repairing loose shutters and reinforcing walls against the winter wind. Magnus stood in the common area, directing the workers with an efficiency that spoke of military training. When he saw Astrid, he beckoned her over. "The Alpha King wants you at the main hall within the hour," he said. "He's starting the review of Omega conditions, and he specifically requested your presence." Astrid's stomach fluttered with nerves. Did he say anything else? "Only that you should bring the list you compiled last night." Magnus's scarred face softened into something almost paternal. "You're doing good work, girl. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." She dressed quickly in her own clothes, grateful to be out of the formal dress. The simple wool tunic and leggings felt like armor compared to the delicate fabric from the night before. Era helped her braid her hair back from her face, the older woman's fingers gentle and practiced. "Remember," Era said quietly, "you have just as much right to speak as anyone else in that room. The Alpha King chose you for a reason." Astrid nodded, though doubt still gnawed at her. Speaking up in the heat of the moment was one thing. Presenting organized demands to the Alpha King and his council was something else entirely. The main hall looked different in daylight. The decorations from the feast remained, but the magical atmosphere had vanished, replaced by the stark reality of a working administrative space. A large table had been set up near the center, surrounded by chairs. Eric sat at the head, with Torsten on his right, and several other wolves Astrid didn't recognize on his left. Eric's eyes found her immediately as she entered. "Astrid, good. Come sit." He gestured to the empty chair on his left, directly across from Torsten. It was a position of honor, one that would normally be reserved for high-ranking pack members. Astrid felt every eye in the room tracking her as she crossed to the table and sat down. "For those who don't know," Eric said, his tone making it clear this was an official introduction, "this is Astrid. She's been living in the Omega Quarters for 6 years and has first-hand knowledge of the conditions there. Hopeful." She turned her head to look at him. "She'll be advising us during this review." One of the wolves Astrid didn't recognize, a middle-aged woman with sharp features and calculating eyes, spoke up. "With respect, Alpha King, is it appropriate to have an Omega participate in administrative decisions? They lack the perspective needed for resource management." "What they lack," Eric said coldly, "is the bias that's allowed the Omega Quarters to deteriorate to their current state. Astrid's perspective is exactly what we need." The woman subsided, but Astrid could feel her disapproval radiating across the table. She recognized the type. This was someone who'd built her position on maintaining the current hierarchy, and any change threatened her status. "Let's begin." Eric pulled a stack of papers toward him. "Torsten, what did you find in your initial assessment?" Torsten, the grizzled head of household, cleared his throat. "The Omega Quarters are in worse condition than we realized, Alpha King. The building itself is structurally sound, but it's been neglected for years. Inadequate heating, poor ventilation, insufficient bedding and supplies. The resource allocation records show regular deliveries, but clearly those supplies never reach their intended destination." "Where did they go?" Eric's voice was dangerously quiet. "I'm still investigating," Torsten said carefully. "But it appears there was a systematic diversion. Someone's been skimming supplies and selling them elsewhere." The sharp-featured woman, who Astrid now realized must be involved in resource management, went pale. "That's a serious accusation, Torsten. Do you have proof? I have discrepancies in the records that need explaining, Helga. Torsten met her gaze steadily. And I will find proof. Eric's expression hardened. Helga, you're suspended from resource management duties pending the investigation. If you're found to have been involved in this theft, you'll face exile. Alpha King, please, Dismissed. Eric's tone left no room for argument. Helga stood, her face white with fury and fear, and left the hall. The remaining wolves at the table shifted uncomfortably, clearly wondering if they'd be next. Now, Eric continued, his attention turning to Astrid. Tell me what the Omegas actually need. Astrid pulled out the list she and Era had compiled. Her hands shook slightly as she unfolded the paper, but she forced her voice to remain steady. The most immediate needs are heating and weatherproofing. Several windows have cracks that let in wind and snow. The roof leaks in the east wing. We need proper insulation and enough firewood to last through winter. Done, Eric said. What else? Food supplies. The rations we've been receiving are barely adequate. Several of the younger Omegas are showing signs of malnutrition, and there's a pregnant Omega who needs better nutrition for her pup's health. Eric's jaw tightened. A pregnant Omega? Why wasn't I informed? She was afraid, Astrid said quietly. Afraid that if anyone knew, she'd lose what little support she had. The father is from another pack, and he doesn't know about the pup. What's her name? Lena. She's 19, and she's terrified. Eric made a note on his paper. I'll speak with her personally. She'll receive whatever care she needs, and if she wants to contact the father, I'll facilitate that. No Omega should face pregnancy alone out of fear. Astrid felt something warm unfurl in her chest. This was why Eric was different. He didn't just make pronouncements from on high. He saw individuals, not categories. They worked through the rest of the list methodically. Medical supplies, clothing, repairs to the bathing facilities, better lighting. Eric approved every request without hesitation, occasionally adding items Astrid hadn't thought to include. By the time they finished, the Omega quarters would be transformed into actual livable housing rather than the neglected storage facility it had become. There's one more thing, Astrid said, her courage building as Eric continued to take her seriously. The Omegas need purpose. Most of them want to contribute to the pack, but they're not given opportunities. They have skills that are being wasted. What kind of skills? Eric leaned forward, his attention focused entirely on her. Era is an excellent healer. She could assist in the medical facilities. Magnus was a warrior before his injury, and he could help train younger wolves in combat basics. Others have skills in crafts, cooking, teaching. If you gave them a chance to use those skills, they'd be assets to the pack instead of burdens. One of the other council members, a younger male with dark hair, spoke up. That's actually not a bad idea. We've been short-handed in several areas. If the Omegas are willing to work, we could use them. They're willing, Astrid assured him. They just need someone to give them a chance. Eric nodded slowly. We'll set up a skills assessment. Any Omega who wants to take on additional responsibilities will have the opportunity, and they'll be compensated fairly for their work. Alpha King, another council member, protested. If we start paying Omegas the same as other pack members, it will upset the entire wage structure. Then the wage structure needs updating, Eric said flatly. Equal work deserves equal compensation. That's not negotiable. Astrid watched the council members exchange glances. Some looked approving, others looked deeply uncomfortable. But none of them dared argue further with their Alpha King. The meeting continued for another hour, hammering out details and timelines. By the time Eric called an end to it, Astrid's head was spinning with information. But beneath the exhaustion was a fierce satisfaction. They'd actually done it. They'd created a plan that would genuinely improve Omega lives. As the council members filed out, Eric gestured for Astrid to remain. When they were alone, he stood and moved to the window, gazing out at the snow-covered compound. Thank you, he said without turning around. For your honesty, for standing up for your people, for trusting me enough to help with this." "You made it easy," Astrid said. She joined him at the window, maintaining a respectful distance. "You actually listened. That's more than most alphas would do. It's the bare minimum of what an alpha should do." Eric's reflection in the window looked troubled. "I've been thinking about what you said last night, about how Finn didn't think I'd care because he's just an Omega. That's a failure on my part. I should have made it clear from the beginning that every wolf in this pack matters. You can't undo years of hierarchy overnight," Astrid said gently. "Change takes time." "Perhaps, but I should have started years ago." He finally turned to face her, and the intensity in his pale gray eyes made her breath catch. "You've been here 6 years, living in those conditions, and I never knew. Never thought to check. That's unforgivable." "You didn't know because the system was designed to keep you from knowing," Astrid pointed out. "Wolves like Helga made sure problems never reached your attention. That's not your fault. It's my responsibility." Eric moved closer, and Astrid's wolf stirred, responding to his proximity in a way that should have been frightening, but somehow wasn't. "Everything that happens in this pack is my responsibility, including what happened to you." "Nothing happened to me," Astrid said, confused. "I mean, the conditions were bad, but 6 years ago, a young Omega arrived at my pack borders in the middle of winter, asking for sanctuary. She was alone, frightened, and clearly running from something. I granted her request without question because it was the right thing to do. But I never followed up. Never checked to make sure she was safe and cared for. I just assumed the system would handle it." His voice roughened with emotion. "That was a failure. My failure." Astrid's throat tightened. She'd never expected Eric to remember her arrival, much less feel responsible for what came after. "You saved my life by letting me in. What happened after wasn't your fault." "Wasn't it?" Eric reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a strand of hair back from her face. His fingers were warm against her cold skin. "You came to me for protection, and I gave you the bare minimum. A roof over your head and just enough food to survive. That's not protection. That's abandonment." "Eric." Astrid didn't know what to say. The guilt in his voice was real and raw, and she wanted to ease it, but she didn't know how. "I want to do better," he said quietly. "Not just for you, but for all the Omegas, for the entire pack. I want to build something worth belonging to." "You already have," Astrid said. "You're a good alpha, Eric. Your pack is lucky to have you." "I don't feel like a good alpha." He dropped his hand but didn't step back. "I feel like I've been blind, comfortable in my position while wolves under my protection suffered. Then change it." Astrid met his gaze directly. "You're changing it. Today, right now, you're making things better. That's what matters." Eric studied her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. "You're remarkable. Do you know that? You've survived 6 years of neglect and hardship, and instead of being bitter, you're using your experience to help others." "I'm not remarkable." Astrid felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I'm just doing what needs to be done." "That's exactly what makes you remarkable." Eric's voice dropped lower, more intimate. "Most wolves would have given up or become hardened, but you're still fighting, still hoping, still kind." The space between them felt charged, like the air before a lightning strike. Astrid's wolf was pushing at her, urging her closer, whispering things she didn't dare acknowledge. She could smell Eric's scent more strongly now, pine and winter wind, and something uniquely him that made her want to lean in. "I should go," she said, but she didn't move. "The Omegas will be wondering what happened in the meeting." "Stay." Eric's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "Just for a moment. Please." Astrid's breath stuttered. She should pull away, should maintain the distance between Alpha King and Omega. But she didn't want to. For the first time in 6 years, she felt seen, valued, safe. "Okay," she whispered. Eric's other hand came up to frame her face, and he leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to stop him. When his lips touched hers, it was gentle, questioning, a request rather than a demand. Astrid's eyes fluttered closed as she kissed him back. Heat bloomed in her chest, spreading through her body like wildfire. Her wolf sang with recognition and joy, a feeling she'd thought lost forever. This was right. This was meant to be. When Eric finally pulled back, his eyes had gone silver, his wolf close to the surface. "I've been wanting to do that since you stood up to Sina," he admitted roughly. "I've been wanting you to," Astrid confessed, then immediately wanted to take it back. Too honest, too vulnerable. But Eric smiled, and the expression transformed his stern features into something almost boyish. "Good, because I intend to do it again. Frequently, if you'll let me." "Eric, I'm an Omega." Astrid forced herself to say the words that needed saying. "You're the Alpha King. This can't work." "Why not?" Eric's hands slid down to her shoulders, steadying her. "My mother was an Omega. My father was Alpha King. They made it work. Your father was already established when he chose your mother. You're still building your authority. Taking an Omega as a mate would undermine you. Let it." Eric's voice was fierce. "I don't want a mate chosen for political advantage. I want someone who challenges me, someone who sees me as more than just a title, someone who makes me want to be better." "You barely know me," Astrid protested weakly. "I know you stood up for a terrified boy when no one else would. I know you spent your first night with adequate firewood making lists to help other Omegas instead of just enjoying the warmth. I know you're brave and kind and stronger than you realize." Eric's grip on her shoulders tightened slightly. "And I know my wolf recognizes yours in a way I've never experienced before." Astrid's heart hammered against her ribs. Was he saying what she thought he was saying? The mate bond? "I think so." Eric's expression turned uncertain, almost vulnerable. "I've never felt it before, so I can't be sure. But when I'm near you, everything feels right. When I'm not, I'm thinking about when I'll see you again. And when you kissed me just now, my wolf settled in a way it never has before." Astrid's own wolf was howling in agreement, recognizing what her human mind was still struggling to accept. The mate bond. The rarest, most precious gift the moon goddess could bestow. A connection that transcended pack politics and social hierarchy. "I feel it too," she admitted. "But Eric, this is going to cause problems. Wolves like Helga and Signa, they're not going to accept an Omega as their alpha's mate. They don't have to accept it. They just have to respect it." Eric pulled her closer, until she was pressed against his chest, his heartbeat strong and steady beneath her ear. "I'm not asking you to decide right now. I know this is sudden. But I want you to know my intentions. I want to court you properly. And if you'll have me, I want you as my mate." Astrid closed her eyes, breathing in his scent, letting herself imagine a future where this could work, where she wasn't just a forgotten Omega, but the Alpha King's mate, where she had the power to make real changes for her people. "Okay," she said quietly. "Court me. Let's see where this goes." She felt Eric's chest rumble with a satisfied growl. "I'll make you happy, Astrid, I swear it." "Just make me safe," she said. "That's all I really need." "You're already safe." Eric's arms tightened around her. "And you always will be, as long as I draw breath." They stood like that for a long time, wrapped in each other's warmth, while snow fell softly outside the window. Astrid felt the last of her walls crumbling, the defensive numbness she'd carried for 6 years finally melting away. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. When they finally pulled apart, Eric kept hold of her hand. "Come, let's go tell the Omegas about the changes. They should hear it from both of us." Astrid nodded, lacing her fingers through his. Together, They walked out of the hall and into the winter afternoon, ready to build something new. Something better. Something that might actually feel like home. What did you think about Eric's decision to publicly claim Astrid, despite the political risks? And have you ever had to choose between what's expected of you and what your heart truly wants? The journey from Invisible Omega to the Alpha King's chosen mate shows us that sometimes the people who see our worth are the ones brave enough to look past society's labels. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you believe in stories about second chances, found family, and the courage to stand up for what's right, join our pack by subscribing. Remember that your value isn't determined by how others see you, but by the strength you carry within and the hearts brave enough to recognize it.